Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by timextender and Excel Data. I'm Stephen Fagg, Director of Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Moving to a Data Fabric, Key Challenges and Enabling Technologies. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible later. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we're excited to have with us Micah Horner, Product Marketing Manager at timextender, and Ashwin Rajiva, CTO at Excel Data. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Micah to get us started. Welcome to the broadcast, Micah.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So what I want to talk about when we're discussing data fabric, I think one of the most interesting aspects of this is the topic that's sort of been not very popular until now, I think, which is metadata. It's sort of a boring topic. And I think what's interesting is now that data fabric is such a big and popular term, I think people are starting to realize the importance of metadata, and it really is one of the key enabling technologies that makes all of this work. So I really want to talk about metadata today. First, I want to sort of dig into the situation that most businesses are in right now. So Salesforce did a study recently, and they found that on average, an organization is using about 1,000 different applications throughout the business. So this can be both on the computer, mobile applications, et cetera. But all of these applications are generating data, right? So through using these applications, there's all this data being generated. All this data is usually it's very siloed. It's all basically locked into each of these applications. So the challenge is, if we want to turn this data into something useful, how do we integrate all this together? How do we collect it? How do we clean it up? How do we turn it into something that can be used to drive business value, right? And when we're thinking about how to solve this problem, how to connect all of this data, how to turn it into something useful, we're really talking about several different categories of problems here. So at the outset of this, when you're trying to build an architecture that can turn raw data into something useful for the business, one of the first considerations you have to keep in mind is, how do we build something that's future-proof? We don't want to be locked into a technology. We don't want to be locked into something that's going to be obsolete in a few years. We want to make sure that wherever we build to turn raw data into useful business insights can scale with us, can adapt to new technology. So that's one of the first big challenges that you have to consider. Ingesting data, of course, you have to take all of these disparate data sources and combine them all together, get them all into one place. Transformation, cleansing, you have to clean up all this raw data, try to turn it into something useful, but not just cleaning and transforming it, also creating a data model that's understandable for the business. Master data management is huge. You have to be able to make sure that those core data assets, like something like customer or product, is consistent throughout the data management lifecycle. So no matter what tools and systems you're using, you need those core data assets to stay consistent throughout this entire life cycle. Data quality, of course, orchestrating all of this, process orchestration, workflow orchestration, metadata management, documentation, lineage, and then, of course, governance and security. These are all big challenges that you have to solve in order to solve that big overall data integration challenge. So right now in the industry, we have this thing called the modern data stack, which, as you can see here, there's all kinds of different categories. These are color-coded on this graphic, but basically the idea here is that we've unbundled the data stack, and now there are point solutions for solving each one of these sort of subcategories of data integration issues, right? So if you're a customer entering into this market and you're trying to solve this problem, this is what you're going to encounter. A lot of fragmentation, a lot of complexity, which means you're usually going to have to hire an outside expert to come in and help you navigate this. Usually a consultant or something like that is going to have to, come in and advise you on which tools you need to get for your use cases, how to integrate them all together, how to make this all work. And for customers, it's very complex. It can be very expensive to maintain all of this and very frustrating to just, again, solve that core data integration challenge. So at the core of this is the lack of a sort of a common metadata standard that can make these tools talk to each other, offer interoperability between these tools, and make all of these tools integrate together and work together to, again, just solve that core problem of turning raw data into something valuable for the business. So that causes a lot of frustration for customers. And I think we're all realizing that metadata is the connective thread here that weaves all of these different data sources, tools, and systems together into what we're now calling a data fabric. So let's talk about what a data fabric is real quick. At the outset of this, again, one of the core enabling technologies here is not just metadata management, not just collecting and storing static metadata, but making sure that you're operationalizing that metadata that you're collecting throughout the data management lifecycle so that you can start streamlining and orchestrating all of these different workflows and processes. Data integration, of course, Data Fabric allows you to integrate all of these disparate data sources into one centralized location. It allows you to automate, again, using metadata, allows you to start automating some of those processes like ingestion, transformation, moving, migrating to different systems. So one of the key benefits of Data Fabric is not just automation, but cost reduction, because you're not spending so much time on manual work. All right. So unified data access, of course, especially if you have something like a semantic layer, you're able to give data access to anyone in the business from a centralized place in terminology that they understand, right? So not just giving them access to raw data or raw data assets, but providing that data model that turns it into something, terminology that the business uses every day. Flexible deployment. What this means is basically, again, talking about future-proof, talking about scalability, making sure that, if you want to deploy on premises, if you want to deploy in the cloud, if you want to do multi-cloud, maybe even a hybrid approach, Data Fabric allows you to deploy in any way, way that you choose there. And then data governance and security, of course, making sure that you have controls over the data, that you have processes in place and policies in place to make sure that only the right people are accessing that data at the right time. So if we look at Gartner's definition here of data fabric, they have sort of this big run-on sentence here, but if you break this up into sort of 4 different components, we're talking about at the outset, again, that active metadata, knowledge graphs, semantics, machine learning, et cetera, all of those things that active metadata enables. And then moving down to flexible, reusable, and enhanced data integration pipelines. When you have both of those in place, when you have these flexible, reusable sort of data flows powered by metadata, you can use them for any operational or analytical use case. And you can do that, again, that flexible deployment allows you to use them across various platforms and processes. So I have seen a lot of articles, a lot of analyst reports, et cetera, that have talked about how there's really not a single vendor data fabric solution out there. But I will beg to differ just a little bit. I think what we've been doing at timextender since 2006 actually meets the definition of a data fabric. So again, you start with the metadata in the middle here. Everything is built on the metadata. All of the data integration processes are orchestrated and automated based on metadata. So that's sort of the orange layer here. And then, of course, the middle layer, or the blue layer here, these enhanced data integration pipelines, these are sort of modular, these are reusable, powered by metadata, and you can use them across all of these different storage platforms that you want, whether that's in the cloud, whether that's on premises, whether you want to do a hybrid approach. We enable all of that. It's very flexible. And then, of course, once you build this sort of end-to-end holistic data integration environment, you can use it for any operational or analytical use case. So whether you want to use that data that you've cleansed to power AI machine learning models, whether you're using whatever visualization tool, business intelligence tool that you want. It enables that flexibility. And what really separates timextender, I think, from a lot of the other data integration solutions out there is that the orange and the blue layer here are separated from the underlying storage layer. So if you wanted to move to a different storage layer or a different storage technology option in the future, say you wanted to go from SQL Server to Snowflake, for example, we allow you to build all of your pipeline and all of your business logic and then migrate with one click to whatever other storage option that you want to. And that's all powered by this sort of unified metadata framework, which is a centralized hub for all of the metadata. It collects it automatically, and then it sort of embeds that metadata in all of these different processes. So what that allows is not just automatic documentation of the end-to-end solution that you have, but it gives you your data catalog, data lineage, your semantic layer, all of these things that you need, end-to-end orchestration, code generation, not just code generation for your transformation code, but also for your deployment code. All of these built-in performance optimization features, that's all provided by having that metadata stored centrally and then operationalized throughout this pipeline. So by utilizing this metadata framework as the backbone of our solution, you get a sort of an efficient, agile, and automated approach to this, not just data integration, but orchestration, governance, all of these various aspects of this data lifecycle that you need to connect through metadata. And that metadata is what allows you to build these solutions faster and drive business value more effectively. So if you look at the old way, sort of the traditional way of building these pipelines, you have this giant network of these ad hoc pipelines that you've built manually, usually using this big stack of tools. You have all these integration headaches. These pipelines are usually very fragile. If anything changes at any point of the pipeline, it can break the entire pipeline. So they're not very robust. They're not very flexible. And what we enable is sort of a modern data flow approach. So everything is united by metadata. It's orchestrated from end to end. Each of these components here, so ingest, prepare, and deliver, these are reusable. They are module components that you can use no matter what data sources you want to swap in and out, no matter what data storage technology you want to swap in and out, no matter what visualization tools, all of those things you can swap around, and the core, the data flow in the middle stays the same, and you can take it with you wherever you want to go. So all of the underlying barriers to adopting data fabric are sort of solved here. So instead of having this fragmented giant stack of tools, you have sort of an end-to-end holistic solution. Security risks are minimized, if not eliminated, because we are using metadata to orchestrate all of these workflows. We actually, in timextender, have no access to your actual data. So we eliminate so many of those security risks and compliance issues as well. Skill shortages are eliminated as well, because the tool is a low-code tool. It's easy to pick up. It's easy to adopt. That employee burnout of always constantly having to relearn new tools and new technology is also eliminated. And then because the semantic layer provides data in familiar business terminology, the communication barriers between IT and the business are also eliminated. So again, back to all of those different data integration challenges, instead of having to buy separate tools for each one of these, if you have a sort of unified single vendor data fabric solution, you can overcome all of these challenges just with one go. So that's timextender. There's a QR code there if you want to learn more, or just go to timextender.com. That's my presentation. I appreciate the time, and I will hand it over to Ashwin now.
Thanks, Mika. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashwin, and today I wanted to talk about challenges around moving to a data fabric, and also cover a little bit of how data observability covers some of these challenges. Now, before I get started, I think wanted to tell you a little bit about Accelerator, but I thought because this would be more of an informative session, so let me tell you a little bit about whom we work with. And so these are kind of a sample of our customers. And if you look at them, one thing common about them is that these are traditionally large enterprises with large data stacks and operations in varied domains. And this brings me to one thing which we have noticed, which is common across all of our customers, is the fact that, and this also brings me to the fact that why is data fabric one of my favorite topics to talk about? It's because this is one of those things which everybody wants, and all the customers that you see, one common thread between them is that they all want it. And everybody thinks that they have some approximation of what they need to build. And what really has happened is that, most people don't really have it. And so the data fabric movement, or the way towards implementing a data fabric, has been, in my opinion, some sort of a moving target over the years. And to kind of discuss why, I think it's important to also understand what is a data fabric. So firstly, I think it's an architectural pattern. And what does an architectural pattern mean? It's as simple as saying that it is a different way of looking at the exact same thing. Now, an architectural pattern which you would have heard of is microservices, containerization, cloud-based applications. Similarly, on the data side, data fabric is actually an architectural approach. It's not a vendor, or it's not a tooling that you can look at, like Micah said. You probably have something which is put together by a lot of vendors over many years. And now you need to take an architectural approach to how do you actually create a data fabric. And one easier way to actually look at it, that's a network model. A network model is essentially more of a hub and spoke model, where you essentially connect into different data sources instead of having things point to point. I think Mika has a great slide on it where it's a whole tangled mess of unconnected applications. And this is more of a network-based application. And the promise is that it allows you seamless data access, integration, and management across the enterprise. Now, how does it actually look like in practice? So this is a slide I picked up from Gartner, and what this actually shows you that for a sufficiently large enterprise with a complex data stack, you're going to bring in data from all types of data sources, and your data fabric is going to connect to all of these data sources. And if you are in the medical field or in the insurance field, health tech, the same data layer is going to provide information about claims, information about customers, information about product, information about compounds, and then it extends to all different functions as well. The same fabric is going to also serve the marketing, the sales, the product, even engineering and decisions made across the enterprise. Now, looking at this, it's easy to understand why something like this is a great architectural model, but it's not trivial to implement. It is extremely difficult. And the reasons for this are many, but I'm just going to put some of them in front of you. There are multiple views on this, but overall, we look at around 6 layers of a data fabric at this point, which is agreed upon by more or less most experts and people looking at this field. You have a data management layer, you have a metadata layer, you have a data discovery layer, a data orchestration layer, a data transformation layer. Very similar to any other data endeavor, right? Nothing special about it. But the idea behind this is that if you implement it in a certain architectural model, then you actually end up with a data fabric. But what happens in reality is that any sufficiently large group of people who have been working in an enterprise for a longer period of time on data initiatives will realize that over a period of time, they have all sorts of data sources. We have we have customers who have data all the way from AS400 into Snowflake and Databricks. there's way too much. The integration complexity is too high. There are too many connectors, too many connections, too many data formats to deal with, all the way from files to proprietary data formats to cloud-based interfaces. And one of the biggest things which we have seen is that people don't want to change. They want the cool thing, but they don't really, they're resistant to actually change it because it's actually a lot of work. One of the most critical things we've seen is around data reliability and trust issues. That you move data into a data fabric, you connect all of your data. Now you're going to make all these decisions based on this new data fabric architecture. Can you really trust it? Do you want to make a multi-million-dollar business decision which might impact, have a direct impact on your bottom line and can have direct impact on people's livelihoods based on bad data? And the other thing which is very less talked about is around scalability and flexibility. It's easy to say that, hey, let me bring all of this data from all of these sources into one central place, but enterprises usually have a lot of data. We were working with a telecom customer who in an hour collects about 1.3 terabytes of data from one data source, and they have 10,000 such sources. So bringing it all together in a place brings huge impact on scalability and flexibility, which also has a direct impact on your cost. And how much does your data fabric actually cost? And is it worth putting so much effort into something where the cost numbers and cost to performance ratio does not really work out? And the last one is that, hey, on this huge set of data now that you've created, you need data discovery and metadata management as well. And so one of the aspects of this, and there are many of these challenges. I want to speak about maybe a couple of them. And from an observability perspective, I think what I would like to address is things around complexity, visibility, trust issues. Of course, things like team dynamics and resistance to change has to be solved from a cultural approach. But there are things which we can solve for. And the number one thing I think is important to know is that as data has grown and as time has passed, the enterprise data stack has become extremely complex, right? So it has evolved from a big data stack, Hadoop and its friends, into what we call a modern data stack. And now you have even more, which people are calling the AI data stack. So you have a tremendous number of tools and vendors and possibilities and architectures that you really need to choose from. And at this point, any of your data leaders can actually select a combination of these technologies to put your data fabric together. And what that ends up doing is that as a data fabric architecture or as an integration architecture is created, and this is a very simplified version of what you would look at, collect data from different sources and move it into the consumption layer, you start seeing a lot of essentially issues in the pipeline, right? So you have issues around the data not being accurate, the data drifting, schema drifting, data quality, data reliability, throughputs, latency, performance, data reconciliation, you name it. So you have visibility, trust, scalability issues all across your data fabric and pipeline, including things around speed and performance. And more or less, the end result of errors during the pipeline results into, I'll have to quickly forward this a little bit, is that, maintaining data trust and data quality becomes more and more complex as new paradigms are added. And the only way I think you need to solve this is to make sure that you look at your data fabric or your data enterprise, your data team as a whole and not in silos. And so data observability, according to us, is an approach towards addressing some of the challenges that you face when moving to a data fabric architecture, where the data observability tooling or the data observability capability looks at a few key important areas inside your entire data architecture. So we are looking at data access, data ingestion, discovery, management, orchestration, and data processing. Now, it does not address all the 100 issues, but it makes an attempt at looking at the most important issues which usually arise. And what that allows you to do is that at every stage of your data pipeline, data architecture, data fabric architecture, you can actually start putting in different probes, right? So whether it is on the source side, you're looking at, making sure that your cost to performance ratio is all right. Whether it's a data quality automation which expands across the stack and make sure that the data that you're pulling into your data fabric is accurate, is reliable, is trustable. Whether it is the cost to performance ratio of the tooling that you purchase, which is very important, the performance that it provides, the utilization and cost, visibility, all of these can be addressed with data observability as a practice. So, the same way we talked about how data fabric is an architectural approach to building a data architecture, data observability is a practice. It's an enterprise data practice, which when you actually talk to your teams and you ask them to adopt data observability as a practice, it allows you to get control over a lot of these variables, which might cause an issue as you plan your architectural shift. And the more control and observability that you put in different parts of your data pipeline, in different parts of your data architecture, we feel that there is a better chance for success when you actually do your re-architecture. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a step in the right direction where you can actually go ahead, look at your issues which you're facing as you re-architect, get the feedback, go back and correct it, and then basically run a feedback cycle, a virtuous feedback cycle, where you get to an end result which would have been difficult to do without the kind of observability that you have. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I hope this has been useful in the way that you kind of understand the role of observability in data re-architecture. And now I'm just going to hand it over to Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashwin, as well as Micah, for those great presentations. So at this point in time, we are going to dive into our group discussion. I have some questions here. I'm really curious to hear your answers. And Micah, we're going to start with you on our first question. First question is, what do you view as the key technology components of an effective data fabric implementation?
Sure. I think, again, it all comes back to the metadata. I think being able to automatically collect and then operationalize that metadata throughout the data lifecycle is the most important part of this. It actually enables everything else that comes after it, including observability too as well. So all of these things are powered by metadata. I think also from our perspective, it's super important to have a solution for end-to-end data integration. So instead of building these data pipelines manually, having a more robust solution for end-to-end data integration. Once you have that, once it's powered by metadata, then you can start automating these workflows and orchestrating these processes better. And then I think the other thing is going back to building a scalable and future-proof architecture, making sure that no matter what you build, that it is flexible enough to accommodate whatever new technology may come out. I mean, we see so many changes every year with the technology, and I don't think that's slowing down anytime soon. So being able to grow and adapt to those new technologies is super important.
Flexibility certainly sounds like it would be key. And, we've certainly heard stories in the past about, data warehouses where as soon as it's finished, it's outdated and new things and changes have come in the interim. Ashwin, curious, do you also agree that this really all starts with metadata? What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think I largely agree. Metadata is the key. It's the entry point to actually getting anything done, right? And one of the things which you would notice that in most tools that you buy, no matter what part of the data stack it serves, usually has some aspect of data discovery, and that speaks to why metadata is actually so important. I think the way that people expect metadata to be used has changed over a period of time. And these days, it's also, a lot of people think it's really about, it's looked at from a aspect of governance a lot of times, right? But I would say, if you look at metadata from like an end-to-end perspective, that it is kind of the starting point, and also important all the way from transformation to change to fabric to consumption. I think it makes a lot more sense, and it makes it so much more powerful than being used for just a governance sort of perspective or a collaboration perspective.
Understood. I think this is a great segue into the next question I have here. Micah, in your opinion, is active metadata becoming table stakes for modern data management? And then Ashwin, I'd like you to weigh in as well.
Yeah, I think it is, especially if we're talking about sort of evolving into a data fabric architecture. Active metadata is essential. I think, static storage of metadata and sort of that traditional metadata management is a good starting point, but making that metadata active, embedding it into all of these various processes and workflows, I think is absolutely essential. And I think it's sort of the natural progression of metadata management. In fact, I think Gartner has changed their magic quadrant from being just metadata management. Now they call it active metadata. So yeah, I think that's the way everything's going.
Ashwin, is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of it is a natural evolution, and I'll explain what that means. Is that, when we talk about active metadata management being kind of table stakes for the modern data stack, it essentially, I feel, means that the newer workloads which are coming in essentially put a demand for real-time, metadata being available. And that is just the way technology has progressed, that at this point in time, there was a point when metadata was used only for driving, weekly reports and monthly reports and decision making. And now metadata is used for everything. Real-time decision making might be even used for, enriching AI models better, so that the analytics happen when the model is trying to predict something, it has the accurate metadata, which is in real time. So I think as the technology progression moves on, and the use of data to provide really high quality, real time, valuable workloads increases, the more will be, the pressure to make sure that you have the exact, accurate, real time metadata available to you at the time that decision is being made. So it is becoming table stakes, and I think very soon, in the next few years, as it evolves, you'll see, something like a real-time metadata management kind of evolve out of this moment as well, and then from there.
That's a great point, and that's really interesting. And I'm glad you brought up AI, because it certainly has a lot of implications there. Switching gears here, and Ashwin, I'm going to let you start with this question. What are the top issues organizations need to watch out for when moving from a legacy architecture to a data fabric architecture?
Yeah, I think I covered this a little bit in my slides. There are a few of them. One of them is, I think, a lot of times, and this is my observation, is that there is something called a vendor overpromise, right? And most of the times, in any organization which has a reasonable amount of complexity and a legacy burden, you've been building this for the last 10 years, bringing all this up, there might be a mistake made by people to think there's a silver bullet somewhere, which, if you bring it in, is going to solve all the problems which are faced now and historically. And to your comment earlier, is like, hey, every new implementation seems to get outdated very quickly. I think this is the reason, that people always believe that there is going to be a silver bullet vendor who will come in and they're going to change the game. And post implementation, they realize that the implementation took us so long that the use cases are not relevant anymore. And so I think there is some sort of a middle ground which people need to take, where they have to be realistic about what can be achieved in what timeline and what vendors fit where, and what can data observability do to actually help, or any other tooling for that matter. A lot of it is in the hands of the data architects, I feel, and they need to kind of up their game to really understand how the data fabric architecture will work, come up with some kind of a realistic timeline in which this can be delivered, and then also kind of overcome that organizational inertia to adopt newer tooling, like Mika explained, right? You got to adopt a lot of newer technologies and then come up with something which is at least relevant for the next few years. So it's a combination of people, technology, and being pragmatic, in my opinion.
Micah, what are your thoughts on the top issues organizations should look out for?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I agree with all those points. I just think that when we're talking about terms like legacy and modern, just to keep in mind that whatever is modern today is going to become legacy in the near future. And it's, again, that's happening faster and faster. So whatever solutions that you're putting in place, just keeping in mind that it needs to be flexible, it needs to be future proof. You need to be able to build it with that change in mind and make sure that you can adapt to those new technologies very quickly.
Moving on to our next question, Michael, we'll start with you. What are some approaches organizations can take nowadays to solve data integration complexity?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of the complexity comes from this sort of fragmented nature of the data stack, and the data stack gets more complicated every year. And I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, I think from the vendor side, it looks like there's kind of going to be a battleground between disconnected tools versus, there's a lot of consolidation happening in the industry as well. So I think more and more vendors are going to try to build a single vendor data fabric. And I think there's a lot of advantages to that. But again, it has to be flexible. You can't get locked into something that's going to inhibit your ability to adapt. So I think that's one way to address the complexity of data integration is having sort of a unified solution that's driven by metadata at the core of it. And then I think once you have that in place, and that metadata, you have active metadata management, then you can start automating and orchestrating a lot of these processes. And instead of doing things manually coding everything together, you can solve a lot of those problems using automation. I think AI is getting better and better every year. It's not perfect yet, of course, but I think a lot of those manual processes of building data pipelines and doing data integration, I think a lot of that's being solved by metadata, which is great because it allows the people who are currently working on those challenges, it frees them up to focus on, I think, more impactful activities, more impactful projects that can bring value to the business.
Absolutely. Automation is, really essential for that. Ashwin, your thoughts on how organizations can get a handle on data integration complexity?
Yeah, let me, provide a slightly different opinion of it and start with a little bit of a story. So long back, I was in a project where the data integration was, one of these drag and drop interfaces. You could just drag and drop, and you can create a lot of very complex data integration. And the end result of it would be that this data integration is a package which lies somewhere on the file system. And if you want to actually make a change, because now we need to make a really change, and so people, what they used to do, because it's again the whole process of getting it done, just open the file, add a new column, put it back, right? And then now you have the change. But what ends up happening is that now it's corrupted. It cannot be dragged and dropped anymore. So people just keep adding and adding and adding. And at the end of it, it was so unmanageable that we said, okay, we need to re-architect the whole thing. So I think complexity builds when you have something simple which works, and then people just keep adding a lot of newer requirements all the time on top of it. It's true for code, it's true for tooling, it's true for data integration, it's true for any technology that you can think of. And the way out of it is, I think the way out of it has been historically to simplify, right? To really go ahead and build things, build tools which do one thing well and they do it right. And so for me, I think because of the way that more and more of data engineering and the tooling seems to spread to where data engineers are able to make, individual data engineers are able to make, changes. I think a lot of this, the integration world is going to move from some of these drag and drop sort of interfaces from tooling into more of code, things like dbt, things like, and with AI especially, because it's so good at generating code. So you probably can have some metadata and ask it to generate code. Notebooks, especially Python, use of Python notebooks, and a lot of that infrastructure is going to move into code, and we're going to see very specific notebooks and pieces of code which will be put together in some sort of repository, and it'll be managed more as code artifacts than being tool artifacts. I think that's where we are heading in a few years, and a lot of I think the drag and drop sort of data integration practices which were developed over the years were kind of developed for analytics, right? Analytics outside the main technical line, and now when you are looking at data preparation for other use cases, I think more specialization and more tooling and more kind of code generation will actually come into the field.
That's a really interesting point, and we do see things moving towards that trend, infrastructure as a code, for example. Next question, Ashwin, how can organizations balance the desire for democratization with the need for strong governance and security?
It's a pretty loaded question, but I'll take a shot at it. The thing with and I'm going to draw some parallels to my role as a technical person, not necessarily as from a data architect perspective. The thing is that I feel everybody wants things to be democratized, right? You want 100% democracy across the board, and everybody needs to be able to participate. Everybody needs to be able to see something. On the other side is that the cost of misgovernance and security is extremely high. This is not one of those things that you can get it wrong after 10 attempts. You got to get it right, and it's critical. Especially we work with a lot of banks, financial organizations, telecom organizations, and I can tell you instances where some of these companies have been publicly fined to the tunes of millions of dollars for data leaks, for poor governance, even things like poor data quality. And so the challenge, I think, is to be able to get the whole security governance aspect of it right, while also providing sufficient amount of creative freedom and flexibility and data democratization. There is no good answer but for, I think, processes and culture in an organization where I think everybody needs to develop this kind of security mindset. And that's not just true for data engineering. It's true for all corporate creative output these days, that there are some things which are non-negotiable, and this is the way it works. You need to understand it and you need to follow it, and all of your work and your need for democracy needs to be in this kind of boundary, and you need to respect it. And most of the time we have seen that it's hard to do because the cultural shift, people want it right now. I want to see this data right now. Why can't I do it? And why do I have to go through 3 days of waiting over a permission portal? But it could be made easier if people's behavior was different. So a lot of it, I think, is cultural. in some sense, and having that kind of security, governance, privacy mindset.
Understood. Micah, would love your input on this question as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ashwin. When you think about democratization, the buzzword right now is data mesh, and pure data mesh. I think if you think about it as a spectrum, on one side you've got centralized IT handling all of the data management, and then on the other side, pure data mesh, which is allowing each domain to build their own data infrastructure, create their own data products. I think while the intention of that sort of pure data mesh model is I understand it, and it does make a lot of sense. I think centralizing some of this and creating more of a hybrid approach is probably going to be more practical for most businesses. And like Ashwin said, you need to have sort of centralized control over data governance, have those policies in place, have those tools in place. But I think what we are trying to do is centralize the tooling, centralizing the governance, but decentralizing the development of data products. So allowing, once you've centralized the data infrastructure and you've sort of built the data integration processes, once that data is cleansed in a centralized place, allowing each domain then to take that cleansed data and then build whatever data products that they want from it. I think that approach makes a lot more sense for most companies.
Understood. Okay, moving on to our next question here. And Ashwin, you highlighted this before. Micah, we're going to start with you on this one. Adopting a data fabric is about people as much as it's about technology. What are key steps organizations can take to better foster a data-driven culture?
Yeah, I think number one, it has to come from the top. Something like this is org-wide. You're dealing with a lot of organizational change. You're going against a lot of organizational momentum. So leadership commitment, leadership buy-in is I think critical for this. It has to start from the top. This can't be something that's sort of grassroots and comes from the bottom. So that's the first thing. I think also there's some obvious stuff like just training and literacy development and all of those things that you need, making sure people understand just sort of the foundational, just the key components of data and how to work with data and what data means and how to implement it in their daily work. And then I think, aside from that, once you have some of that data literacy in place, more collaboration, more communication between these cross-functional teams, more communication between IT and the business. I think a lot of times what happens is the organization understands the importance of data, and people want to use data in their daily lives, whether they're technical or not. But one of the problems that arises is that the business may have data needs, but they struggle to communicate those needs in a way that IT understands and vice versa. So having that unified language to communicate and collaborate around data, I think is super important. And then beyond that, it's whatever tooling you're going to provide to people, it needs to be user-friendly. They need to be able to adopt it quickly and actually implement it into their daily work as fast as possible.
That's a lot of great suggestions. Ashwin, anything you would add on the subject of enabling a data-driven culture, fostering a better culture for that?
Yeah, great points there. One of the things which I'd like to add is that, and this is true for any, I think, technology or practice. One of the things which I've seen work well is the concept of buying in, right? And let me give you a parallel, right? Data fabric adoption is a larger org-wide kind of an, top-down, like I rightly said, concept. I think people conflate adopting a tool to actually adopting a methodology. So the moment you give somebody a tool saying, hey, we are going to adopt XYZ tool, of course you're going to have some people who are going to love it and some people who just hate it, right? It's just normal. You're going to find, no matter how good anything is. It's true for Snowflake, it's true for Databricks, it's going to be true for Axel Data as well. So what works is that people need to buy into a concept, and there needs to be a collective understanding of, if we do this, then it makes our lives better, and it also grows it eventually makes the organization more efficient. This could be anything, right? I could ask all my people to start working on behavioral, BDD testing. And if I send a diktat saying, from now onwards everybody needs to have like 60% coverage, people's not gonna, they're not gonna buy in. But I think there is a way in which you can push in education and benefits by making people understand when they adopt it, they become better implementers, better data engineers, better software engineers themselves. And therefore, the organization benefits from a collective rise in capability, right? If you know what I mean. And so, I think building a data-driven culture is something exactly the same. So the people at the top, the architects, the VPs need to make sure that people buy into the concept, and then they say, okay, what's the best tool that I can use to kind of practice this concept or this architectural way of doing things.
That's a really interesting point, Ashwin, and you can see that in a lot of things. What's in it for me at the end of the day? So if there's not a stick, there has to be some sort of carrot, or at least an understanding. This will make us better. This will also make our jobs a lot easier at the end of the day. So I'm going to loop in an attendee question. I just saw one come in that I think is frankly pretty interesting. Micah, I'm going to let you have first shot at this, followed by Ashwin. Are large organizations, due to the mistaken belief in technology, devaluing business knowledge, and this is leading to organizations not being able to fulfill their business requirements? It's kind of an interesting perspective. Curious of your thoughts.
So what? I'm sorry. Can you read it one more time? I'm not sure if I understand.
Sure. The question is, are large organizations, due to the mistaken belief, maybe they're overvaluing technology and devaluing business knowledge, and is this a problem?
Okay. Yeah. If I understand the question correctly, I think this is something that we deal with quite a lot as well, which is especially when we're in talks with prospects, for example. So the conversations quickly devolve into sort of this discussion over how do we hyper optimize everything from a technology perspective. And I think this is a huge issue. When you're talking about utilizing data, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to hyper optimize for technology, or are we optimizing for driving business value, for optimizing processes, for in getting more informed opinions, more informed decision making every day throughout the business? I think this issue, you really have to start with first principles and go back to what are we actually trying to achieve here, and then work from there, instead of trying to take the technology first approach where we're looking at what can we do with technology. There's that quote, I think it's from a comic book. It's like he asked himself something like, what could he do, but he should have asked himself sort of why are we doing this in the first place? I think that's the most important question to keep coming back to throughout the process too, not just from the beginning, but throughout the process of developing these environments. Is what are we actually trying to accomplish here? You'll avoid a lot of mistakes that way.
Yeah, making sure you stay aligned with business objectives and kind of keep a view of the forest from the trees. Ashwin, would love your input on this as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think short answer, yes. And I'll try to explain it the way I look at it. I think an organization, a company of any sort, from NVIDIA to Apple to Accelerator, is essentially, collective intelligence gathered over a period of time, right? And it's largely an emergent property. So in an organization, there's not one person who knows everything, right? Especially for larger organizations, nobody knows the whole business. And I think as the trend has shifted over the years, that most, I saw a statistic somewhere that data leaders have a timeline of 18 months in an organization before they are changed. And so if you come in and you're asked to, you got to somehow improve the bottom line by collecting all this data. By the time you get everything done, you're already on your way out. And so the whole thing here is that, we hugely devalue the knowledge of people and the organization, and how people look at some problem, any problem which needs to be solved. What is the fundamental reasoning behind it? And a good anecdote here is that one of my best customers has been at the same company for the last 37 years, and you can't get anything by him and bullshit him and get away. And that's because they know fundamentally about the business. What are they doing? What are the challenges? What's the history? What do they really need to achieve? Whereas if people come in with and you give them a target suddenly that you got to achieve in the next 6 months, they're going to start bringing up things which are probably not even important. So yes, I completely agree that technology is an enabler, and as you have more domain knowledge, business knowledge, you can actually use technology better. Otherwise, you might tend to believe that the technology will solve the problem, which is usually the other way around.
Understood. That's a great point. So we're just about at the top of the hour, and apologies if we did not get to your question. I am going to share all of the attendee questions with our speakers today and their teams. But one last question to both of you from me. If there's one thing that you would really like our audience today to walk away keeping in mind, what would that be? And Micah, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I've repeated it several times, but I just think that the importance of metadata is key here. So making sure that whatever solution you're building, that you're keeping active metadata in mind and using that as the foundation of everything, making sure that you have an ability to automatically collect metadata and then, again, operationalize it throughout all of these processes. I think that's the key to building a data fabric, right? And that is the connective thread. That, when we talk about fabric, what is fabric? The analogy, if you think about fabric, it's interwoven threads, right? And that's, to me, the metadata is what weaves all of this together and makes it an actual data fabric.
I love that image. That's great. Ashwin, your final remarks.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think people should remember that there's no real silver bullet here. And it's kind of an architecture / mindset problem, which they need to be really, first understand why do they need this a data fabric, then figure out if they actually know all the details which are required to be successful, and then really take decisions step by step to make sure that, that the outcome is useful. And of course, as the leaders in data observability, I would like to, suggest people that they actually take a look at observability as a practice and apply it into their, data architecture to make sure that whatever they build, they understand what's going on inside, so that they get better outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to give a huge thank you to our speakers today for coming on board and sharing their insights and expertise. Once again, Micah Horner, Product Marketing Manager at timextender, and Ashwin Rajiva, CTO at Excel Data. If you in attendance would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived, and we will provide you with an email. We'll send you an email notification once the archive is up. And you can also download a PDF of the deck once that archive is on our website. As I mentioned earlier, just for participating in today's event, you could win this $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on June 28th. We'll let you know if you're the lucky viewer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.